Hello, I'm Jim, and this is my wonderful wife, Carla. And this is another episode of the journey of life, love, and lessons.
Yes, and we're so glad you, as the audience, have joined us. And we have an incredible guest on here.
Yes.
And we got to know him a few weeks ago at an award ceremony that he was the speaker at. And we really enjoyed his message and his heart of what he does and to help people, not only where he's at, but around the world. He's impacting people. So we really wanted to be able to bring him on here to share his knowledge, his insight with everyone. So I'm going to read his bio and then we'll get to know him a little bit more throughout this episode. So Richard Lee-Thia is a TEDx speaker, connection consultant, and co-author of Become Your Super Self. Connect with yourself to connect with others. His TEDx talk, How to Find Excuses to Connect, outlines how people can make meaningful connections easier. His ultimate vision is to create a world without loneliness. Growing up, we never had classes on social skills. Addressing this lack of education, Richard engages audiences with interactive presentations that leave them feeling more socially confident and equipped with tools to make meaningful connections in their personal and professional lives. He is also a podcaster, associate certified coach with the International Coach Federation, and adjunct instructor at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology. His motto is, "You never know how any connection can transform your life." Connections can happen anywhere and anytime. So he encourages you to find that excuse to connect. So I love all that. And you are very busy in what you're doing. It's like impacting and keeping you busy. So welcome to the show. And it's an honor for us to be able to have you here.
Yeah, well, it's an honor that you invited me. So I'm looking forward to our conversation. And I'm glad that my presentation a few weeks ago at that award ceremony resonated with you
It
so much.
did. Yes, it did. And I think it resonates with a lot of people because I believe not only through the pandemic, but also I think we had a lot of, kind of it's carrying over, a lot of times into people's lives. And so to have people like you that can come and speak into that and to be able to give them that techniques, the strategies, and just the knowledge to let them know they're not alone and there is ways that we can connect, right? And so can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and kind of like how you got started with this journey?
Yeah, there's a phrase that I've come across that I find very impactful, which is healing the hole in my heart, in the sense that I think a lot of our work that we end up doing gets is informed by our personal struggles. And that was very much the case for me, where growing up, I felt shy and lonely. And as mentioned in my bio, like there wasn't any formal education around how do you make friends and
Right.
how do you communicate effectively. And so I had all sorts of misconceptions. One of the main ones was in books and movies and TV shows, they always portray the main character and they have their best friend or their group of best friends, right? And so for the longest time, I thought that's what I need to have as well. But I never had someone I considered my best friend, or they would consider me their best friend. And so I thought I was doing something wrong and there was some missing void there. And then another key experience is moving away from my hometown to go to another city for university and starting from scratch because I didn't know anyone there. And even though I was physically surrounded by people, I still felt homesick and out of place, and all my relationships felt quite superficial.
Mm-hmm.
So again, that same loneliness feeling came back up. And social media didn't help too because I would see my friends posting about the events and parties they're going to, and I'm sitting home alone. And I had this idea that, well, first of all, I wanted to build community and connection for myself, but wanted to build it for others too. I'd been following this project for a while called Humans of New York. And so, for people that aren't familiar with this, basically, it's this stranger or this photographer who wanted to go interview strangers in New York and get to know their stories, take a photo of them, and then post that afterwards online. And that really captured people's interest to the point that his platform has millions of followers, and it sparked this movement in other places where, like, humans of insert location, whatever the city or the institution is. Because what it showed is everyone has this rich interesting story, and it just takes a conversation to connect with them. And so I was inspired by that. I wanted to do that same thing at my university. And so I started interviewing students and professors and staff. And even after that 30 or 40-minute conversation, I feel like I'd made a new friend because I've gone to know them beyond just small talk. I know their struggles that they've gone through, how they've gone to where they are today, what are their dreams. And so I've gone to know them on a much deeper level. And so one by one, having those types of conversations helped me to feel more settled in my community. But also, I had interviewed some upper year students who I had perceived that they had everything together, right? But that was not the case. When I asked them what it was like to go to university and what that transition was like, they also shared that they felt homesick and lonely. And so that's when it finally clicked for me that it wasn't just me, and isn't anything wrong with me. It's just that this topic is still under discussed. And so there's stigma and shame, and I'm trying to normalize that. Mm. So what started off as a passion project of running this in university has now become the center of my work because it's just needed. Right. Connections are important throughout our whole lifespan. And naturally, when we have these transitions too, whether it's moving to a new city or getting married or having kids or retiring, all of those disrupt our social network. Oh, and the pandemic, of course. Right. There's all these events that disrupt our social network, and it takes time to actually reestablish. And how do we navigate all these things that, again, are under discussed? So yeah, again, this type of work has been very self-healing for me, but I know that a lot of other people are struggling with this, which is what drives me to engage with this type of work.
Right. And I believe that a lot of people actually deal with this. And like you found out, I think, we can say hi and we got it all together. And that's fakeness that we have. And when deep inside, once you get to know someone, it's kind of like, oh, wow, we do share that. We do feel alone. So I think everybody desires to have that companionship. I think everybody desires to have that relationship, but it seems like the opposite happens. It seems like we withdraw because it's just me. Well, there's something wrong with me. So I need to, I got to stay away because I don't want to feel awkward around people when I talk with them, sound crazy and all that stuff. But, kind of like, what is a first step, someone that feels like that? What would you say could be a first step, to kind of help in that situation?
Yeah, for sure. A helpful tool that I learned from my therapist is called a fear ladder. And so imagine there's a ladder and there's 10 different rungs, and each rung corresponds to a different level of fear. If I told someone, for example, hey, just go out and approach a stranger and start a conversation, and that's something that they're not used to at all, that might be a 9 or 10 on their fear ladder. Right. And so that is actually too much of a leap for them to take action because it's way beyond what they're currently comfortable with. Right. But if instead I ask someone what's their 1 out of 10 on their fear ladder, so what's something that is slightly outside of your comfort zone but still feels doable, then that's what you can practice over and over until you expand your comfort zone. And then you can go on to what's your 2 out of 10, your 3 out of 10, and so on. So I like this framework because it gives people an actionable way, regardless of where you're at. Because your 1 out of 10 is going to look different than someone else's 1 out of 10. And just to give you a concrete example, because I've used this framework before, someone told me their 1 out of 10 is reaching out to one of their existing friends and asking if they can meet for coffee. And the reason that's the 1 out of 10 is because they already have existing rapport with this person. They know that the likelihood of rejection is very low. And yet it's still helping them to practice this skill of reaching out. Because ultimately, social skills has the word skills in it. But sometimes I think we assume that we should already know these things, when in reality, it's like learning how to ride a bike. You're going to get up, you're going to fall down, and you need to get back up, and you practice until you develop that fluency or competency. Right. So it's the same here too. So the fear ladder, but also being self-compassionate, because it's you need to practice it, and you are going to fail, and there's going to be some awkwardness, but that's okay as well. It's all part of the process of learning.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is, we know a woman, she has studies and stuff that she does, but she's, what is a recovering awkward person. And so she has studies
Yep.
to say, how can I talk with people? How do I do this? Because it is,
Mm.
I mean, fear can be real. Nobody wants to be
Oh,
rejected.
yeah.
So if you
Yes.
walk up to somebody, like you're saying, that small step, that actionable step, can help you get to the next step. And then you can start climbing that ladder, as you say.
Yes. Yeah, I'd be interested to know more about this person who's doing these awkwardness
Yeah.
studies, because
I'll
there's
send your information.
yeah, no, that's great, because I'll expand on that point too, because there's actually a lot of research, if you can believe it or not, out there around like connection and loneliness, and a lot of it points to one, like how important it is for our health and well-being in the long term, but also recognizing that we tend to blow things out of proportion. We think that an interaction is going to be negative and awkward, but when people, what they report afterwards is actually more positive than they think.
Right.
Because they did this study, for example, where people on their commute, like taking the subway, they had one group of participants, just go about their regular, how they would do their commute, but they did challenge the other half of the group to like start a conversation with someone while you're on the subway. And they had people estimate before, how they think this is going to go. And then they had people report after that experience how it went. So again, most people reported feeling like this is, I'm going to bother that other person. They won't want to talk with me. It's going to be awkward. But the research showed that it was actually more positive than they thought, because it's sort of recognizing perhaps the other person you're going to chat with, they're looking for connection too.
Right.
And they're going to welcome having this interaction during the day. And if they don't, I think you can tell pretty quickly by someone's energy if they they don't really want to talk. But I find that generally most people are quite open to chatting, and they're friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah, like for me, I have two younger sisters, and they were very interactive with people. And I was, as I said, when I was in high school, I tell people, I was like, they like, when did you go to school? And I was like, well, I have two younger sisters. And I named them, like, oh, yeah. When were you there? I was like, I was the one that blended in with the wall. Because I didn't act with people. I didn't want to involve people much, because I was afraid of what they would say, just like you're talking about, what their impression may be of how I look. And so, for me, I've grown up. Now I'll more likely to talk with people and start conversations with them. I had to do a little trick for me to, because sometimes people, like, you run across someone and you say, like you're saying, they may not want to talk, or they'll say something, negative or rude to you. And sometimes you could take that on as personally, like, oh, well, why they say that about me?
Right.
So I used to take that personally. And so I came up with this little off the wall thing just to help my mental aspect of it. And my example of it, somebody says, well, you're stupid. And I will say, well, thank you for the compliment. And so what that did to me personally, it was like, okay, I just let it roll off my back. And to them, they're like, I just called you stupid, and you're saying thank you? I don't want to talk to you anymore. And so they believe, and they wouldn't stick to me, and I just go on.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great way of approaching it. I do want to expand on this a bit more too, because I think people are often given the advice, just put yourself out there more, which I don't feel like is that actionable, because I don't think it's that people lack an understanding or like knowing what to do. It's how to go about it. Because, for example, like we're told like exercise is good for you, like you should eat healthy, and yet people run into barriers or roadblocks to actually making that happen. And I think it's the same when it comes to connecting too, because there's a lot of these worries and fears and anxieties. And so some other reframes of my mindset that I found helpful is, for a long time I was worried about being rejected. Like, are people going to like me? But I realized I have the power to reject others. It's like, instead of thinking, do they like me, do I like them? Like, do I act like, if I don't like that person, why am I even really listening or engaging with that type of conversation, recognizing that I have the power to set boundaries for myself too, and that it's actually okay not to get along with everyone, because it's just not possible. There's some people that you're not going to get along well with, and they might not like you, you might not like them, and that's okay, because you can focus on the actually positive relationships in your life that are supportive and energizing, and they have your best interests in mind, and so on. Another helpful tool I've come across is changing your what ifs into even ifs, because we can have a lot of these what ifs of, what if this person doesn't like me, or what if this person rejects me, and all that. But what can happen is all these what ifs just paralyze you from taking action, because you have all these worries that might not actually occur. But if you just change it to an even if, like, even if I get rejected, then what? It puts the power back into you to recognize that even in that worst case scenario, there's a way for you to respond and move forward from it. Just as you said, Jim, like, if someone says you're stupid, even if someone says you're stupid, you can tell them thank you. So you're able to still respond to it. So yeah, I mean, there's lots of potential fears and anxieties that people have, but just recognizing if you actually break it down, there's still stuff you can do to prevent that from happening. Or even if the worst case scenario happens, you still have the power to respond to it, or choose, like, okay, this didn't work out this time, what did I learn from it?
Right.
Try again.
Right. And I think that's powerful, just for people to know in their mindset, like, instead of what if, which a lot of stuff don't happen, but even if it does, how can I have my power, to like not let it attach to me, to know that, okay, I can learn from this, and I can grow, and I can maybe say something a little different the next time, or act a little different the next time. And so journeys of life is process, right? Everything that we do, the learning process. But I think the what if and the even if is very, very beneficial for people to not, withdraw. I think it can make you withdraw or propel you to, like, okay, I want to do better next time.
Yeah, definitely.
So it's like, I know that you have a lot of things that are like for loneliness and stuff. And do you have programs? Do you have some coaching or consulting that you do in order to help people?
Yeah, definitely. A large focus of my professional work right now is working with university and colleges, because I'm not that far removed from it. And I think students are especially struggling after the pandemic. I've been hearing that there's a lot of high social anxiety, and people are just staying in their rooms. And when you don't have a support system as you're going through school, it just makes it that much more difficult. So a lot of my professional works have looked like delivering workshops and keynotes when I partner with those higher education institutions. But outside of that, I do run a group coaching program as well called Connection Club, where we meet every single Monday evening. Because what I realize is connection is not theoretical. It needs to be practiced and experienced in real time with real people. And so Connection Club creates that safe and consistent space where I can bring in, like, here are the different strategies, here's what the research says, here's how you can practice with each other. I'll give you some prompts, and bringing in guest speakers to share their perspectives as well. So that's been really rewarding for me, just to have this outlet, or create this place that I wish I had when I was much younger, and allowing people to let's unpack these things, because if it's not being taught in the school system, my view is it's still not too late, and it's really important to learn these skills, because it's going to carry forward with you for the rest of your life, whether it's your personal or romantic relationships, or like when it comes to professional networking and opportunities as well. So I'm always learning more as well. If you can believe it, there's a human connection conference happening next month that I'm attending. It's being hosted in Toronto, and it'll be nice to meet other colleagues in this field.
Yeah, that brings that connection there, right?
Yes.
Is the thing that you do, the program for the college, is it something that's only in person, or is it something people connect virtual? Do you do that as well, or it's just only in person right now?
I've done it virtual as well, because it just depends. Because unless that institution's willing to pay for my travel, delivering it virtually might make more sense. It depends too, because I've heard also from some institutions that their students don't really show up to many in-person things, and the online might still be more accessible to them. So yes, definitely, I've done in-person stuff when it's more local to where I'm living, but also done virtual presentations too.
Right, right. It all works. So as a instructor of the college, like when the students first come in,
Yeah.
you know, what is that like compared to when they're finished? Can you tell like that big change in them or the growth in their life from the beginning? You know, like, okay, they come in awkward, they come in feeling alone, but then they progress.
Yeah. I think the biggest recurring phrase I hear is, I thought it was just me. Like when they were coming in, right? It's very similar to my experience where I thought I was the only one going through this. And when there's actually a safe space where people can hear from other people's experiences, like, hey, I've also struggled with this, or sometimes I feel awkward, I've been rejected. That helps so much just to break down those barriers of shame, and recognizing that we're all in the same boat and working through this. So I think that's just breaking down that mental barrier, but then getting practical tips that they can go out and apply to, as I said, for example, that fear ladder. Or a big thing for me is just, how do you find an excuse to connect? It's like, what's your common ground for you to start a conversation with someone? And a lot of times that just involves being aware of your surroundings and using your five senses. Because uh, for instance, if I see someone reading a book that I'm interested in, that could be my excuse to connect, to ask them about it. It's like, hey, I read that book before too, or I've heard that author. What do you think about this book? Or there's this, if I'm to help you visualize this, there's this technique called triangulation. So, like, imagine there's me and there's another person, but what's the third point that's between us that can serve as that common ground or that excuse to connect? So it could be a physical thing, like if I'm walking in a park and there's like some, I don't know, interesting statue, and then that's the third point in our triangle where I'm like, hey, this is kind of funky public art. What do you think about it? So it's just getting into the practice or mindset of like, how can you find those excuses to connect? Because they are actually all around you all the time, if you are paying attention, or you just create your own. Like as Carla, you did. You engaged with an excuse to connect where I spoke at this event and you reached out. It's like, hey, I liked what you spoke about. Do you want to be on my show? So you did it.
I did. I found an excuse. I found a reason, didn't I? And I the things you talked about, and I'm reaching out to people. Just let them know, text. Just let them know, that you're thinking about them. I've done that too. So I listened to your speech. So I put it into action. So I love it when I can connect with people that has that knowledge and stuff that I can put into action. It's just wonderful.
Yeah. Oh, and thanks for reminding me of this, because there's a few extra points I want to make too. Because sometimes we think that we need to make new connections, which maybe yes, but I think there's also value in looking at what are your existing relationships that are going well, or your existing relationships that perhaps you want to deepen too. Because sometimes we do lose touch with people. It's just how life goes, because we have changes and life transitions. But sometimes there might be people that when you do interact with them, you find it very energizing, but it's just that you don't see each other that often. Right. So that might be a type of conversation you have with that friend. It's like, hey, I'd like, I value this relationship and I'd love to, perhaps see each other more often. What do you think about this? Right. And it's okay to have these types of conversations, because otherwise people can't read each other's minds. So it's good to clearly communicate. Just in a romantic relationship, you can have this type of communication with your friendships too, so that it's providing you the type of support and value that you're looking for. So recognizing that no one's actually starting from scratch. You have existing relationships in your life, and you have existing meaningful connections too. And sometimes you can examine like, well, how did those come about? Because besides family, like all your other friendships, it all started with a stranger, actually. Like there's one point that you didn't know each other, you had some initial meeting, and now that's blossomed or developed into this friendship. So you've been doing this already.
Yeah.
So you can derive some, confidence, or like seeing that you're not starting from scratch. You're just refining these skills.
Right.
Yeah.
You're talking about, and you had a book that, maybe find a common interest there.
Hmm.
And did you co-author a book? It was called what? Becoming Your Super Self. And
Yes.
with was it with Connect Yourself with Others? So
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
inspired you to be co-author with the book?
Yeah. So there's a connection story behind the book itself. So I ran a podcast for a while, where I was interviewing other people doing work in the human connection field. And so I interviewed someone named Dr. Priscilla Shelp. And we had a great conversation. I published her podcast. I didn't think much of it. And then a few weeks later, she reached out to me out of the blue. It's like, hey, Richard, I'm thinking of writing a book about connection. And I remembered our podcast conversation. And I was wondering if you want to be co authors. So, of course, you say yes to the
Yeah.
opportunity. And so her and I collaborated over the course of the next several months, to create and self publish this book. So she lives in Germany and I live in Canada. So actually, her and I have never met in person
Oh.
yet. But it just goes to show that, my motto in life, you never know how any connection can transform your life. And this is a great example of that. It's like,
Yeah.
this person I had on my podcast that led to us writing a book together.
Yeah.
And really, the core focus of this book is it's about connection, but I think one of the first foundational steps is to connect with yourself, because I've seen that in my personal experience where, because I had a lot of insecurities, that was actually hindering how I interacted with others.
Mhm.
Because I didn't feel secure and confident with myself, that's why I'm so worried. Like, am I being accepted? Do I have validation? What are other people thinking of me?
Right.
But once I'm able to connect more with myself and, be happy and confident with who I am, then others people's opinions don't really matter that much anymore, because I like who I am. So it
Mhm.
doesn't matter what other people think about me. I know this is easier said than done. This is like a several year journey, and still ongoing journey, honestly, like to develop self-worth and confidence. But so much of, like, now that I'm more connected with myself, it makes it much easier to show up authentically and connect with others, because I don't need to pretend to be something different or conform to be whatever I think I need to be to fit in. I can just be myself because I've learned who I am.
Right.
So a lot of the focus of the book is like connecting with yourself, which then allows you to better connect with others.
Right. And I think that's very important I think it all starts within,
Yeah.
because you have to get that, the awareness and that journey to, like you're saying, be confident in who you are,
Mm-hmm.
to actually love yourself, because then that's going to reflect outward. Because if you have the
Yeah.
insecurities, you have lack of confidence, well, then you're not going to see your value in the world. And you're just going to, like, who wants to hang out with me? I don't care if you're good or bad, just somebody to be
Yeah.
with. And so that's something I believe, like you're saying, I love the book, that you have to first discover yourself. And then
Yeah.
from that you will discover, more of the relationships outside that's beneficial, and that's, adds value to you as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Easier said than done. Self work takes a lot of work. Well, I will highlight a few aspects though that people might commonly experience, like people pleasing, for example. I used to be a people pleaser, but I can very clearly see now that that was because, again, I didn't have these secure relationships growing up. And so whatever relationships or connections did come into my life, there's almost a sense of desperation or wanting to cling onto it because I feared like it would, fade away or I'd be abandoned. And
Right.
so I would engage with people please because like, okay, well, it seems like when I try to make other people happy around me and, whenever they ask something of me to say yes and all that, that it tends to keep the relationship intact. But really, I've learned now is at the sacrifice or compromise of my own values and boundaries. Because if I'm always constantly people pleasing, then I'm not attending to my own needs.
Right.
And recognizing that people can take advantage of that too. Like if you're constantly being nice and people pleasing, that people might not have the best intentions or have a genuine reciprocal
Right.
connection there.
Yeah.
Another concept that I've come across is it's called rejection sensitivity. And so what that looks like is, and I've had some of this too, but it's almost just the anticipation that you will be rejected, that you're just waiting for that to happen. And what happens too is that you can interpret neutral stimuli as negative. So say, for example, someone doesn't text me back. Someone with rejection sensitivity is going to interpret that as, well, this person hates me, right? That's why they're not messaging me back. When really there's many possibilities. Maybe that person is just too busy right now and hasn't had time to read your message or whatever it is. But a person with rejection sensitivity is going to jump to the worst case scenario and interpret all these neutral social cues as negative. And then that can lead them to overreact as well when there's any type of conflict, or they'll profusely or overly apologize, which then makes the other person uncomfortable too. So rejection sensitivity is a tricky one, but recognizing that, like a lot of things, it does come from our upbringing and our childhood and what we observe. Because how rejection sensitivity can develop is if you grew up in a situation where your parents or your guardians or whomever, they blame their child for when they're upset. So the parents will blame their children, you're the reason why I'm upset. And so what the child then learns is that they have to be hyper vigilant of the mood of everyone around them, and not walk on eggshells and not try to say anything or do anything that's going to piss. And so what ends up happening is that they just close themselves off and try to be invisible and try to keep everything without conflict as possible. But then really what that leads to is rejection sensitivity, because they're always waiting for something to go wrong because they think they're at fault. The child's at fault, when really it's more about the parents' lack of emotional regulation and also misattributing the blame to their kid. But so the child has this self-protective mechanism, which makes sense that they're going to be hyper vigilant of all these different cues around them and try not to. But this carries into adulthood too, and it makes it a huge barrier to connect with people, because if you're always anticipating the worst and you're overreacting, then it's going to make it really difficult to connect with people. Right. So how do you go about that? Then you put yourself in situations where you try to have as much neutral stimuli as possible, just to reprogram your mind and give it new data that actually the conclusions that you have from childhood don't necessarily apply in adulthood too. And there are people that they're not going to blame you if they're upset. They can be mature, responsible adults, and recognizing that there are people that care about you genuinely. So lots of tricky things. That's what makes this self-work really tricky to untangle, because we develop all these coping mechanisms growing up that are self-protective, but then now need to be unlearned and replaced with different types of beliefs and behaviors as an adult. So
that's awesome stuff there. I mean, a lot of people are not aware of it. And like you're saying earlier, sometimes you may have a preconception of what somebody thinks about you. And so it's like what you're describing about, there's those scenarios where, parents or siblings or something like that make someone else feel like they're the issue. But sometimes there could be like me thinking about, I'll be like, well, I always thought about what somebody's thinking about me. I don't want to do something that causes them to think what I think they're thinking about me. And so like you're describing that, could see where somebody well, I think that I'm causing, XYZ problem or whatever. So I need to respond this way. And I don't know if, through the stuff you go through, if there, that people may be having that experience, is what would you say or suggest that would make them ask themselves or say something to see oh, that's me. That's the way I react. This is my situation. Because when it's your norm, you don't recognize those type of things.
Right.
So I don't know if there's something, it sounds like you've gone through some yourself, what brought it to your attention? Did you ask yourself something, or did you see something, or how did that come about?
Yeah. Where did this start for me? I'm a big fan of Brene Brown. So she's a psychologist and researcher and has done a TEDx talk as well. And the nature of her work focuses on shame and vulnerability and self-worth. And I remember reading, I've since purchased basically all of her books, but the first book I read from her is Daring Greatly. And what impacted me so much about her book is that it finally put to words these different types of thought patterns and behaviors that I've really never questioned before. Because as a child, you just don't know, right? You just absorb whatever's around your environment and you try your best to survive. But I remember, for example, reading her section about perfectionism, and I felt called out in a way of like, wow, this has never been so so evident. This is right in front of me. Because she was describing perfectionism. Really, it's a self-destructive belief system that thinking that if you're perfect enough, that then you won't be judged and blamed and shamed. But it's self-destructive because perfection is never achievable. And then when you fall short of perfection, you just blame yourself rather than questioning, is this belief system even sound in the first place? But basically, she outlines that shame is really a core emotion for people. That shame is this feeling that you're not good enough, and you're not worthy or deserving of love and acceptance and belonging. And we develop all sorts of coping mechanisms to deal with that shame and hide it away, including perfectionism and people pleasing, or numbing our emotions, or distracting ourselves, or retaliating against others. So all sorts of things. But once that was named to me, I'm like, oh, this is why I've been behaving the way I am. It's because I feel shame. I feel like there's some part of me that's not good enough. And one thing she said in the book is to go from I'm not good enough to I am enough is as simple and as complicated as just believing that you're good enough.
Right.
And that was a long journey because a lot of my upbringing, now that I can trace it back, was, I had very high expectations and standards put onto me, and I felt like I needed to have high academic achievement and extracurriculars and all that to receive praise and validation. So that sense of being good enough was very conditional, that it needed to be validated by someone else rather than me feeling it inherently and validating myself. So I'm like, okay. And we also, by the way, we grew up in a culture of shame too. It's always perpetuated in like marketing and advertising. It's like you're lacking something. Something's wrong with you, and that you need this product or service to feel full, like feel actually whole. So all that to say, it's like I think the starting place is just to see, like, maybe are you experiencing shame? Is there a part of yourself that you feel like you're not good enough? And what type of behaviors are you engaging in right now that might be trying to cover that up? And it takes a lot of time. I'll say it took quite a while for me to really truly believe that, hey, I am good enough as is, and I have enough in my life as is. And once I was secure in that, like, so much, it just allowed me to move forward so much quicker. But yeah, that is the core thing, because it gives me a lot more compassion too, because when people are going through different types of pain, or like rude behavior, all that, sometimes I just wonder, like, I wonder what's underlying that. Because even when, in a teaching setting, for example, like if there's students that are acting out and being rude and misbehaving, that behavior is communication in a way. And I'm wondering, it's like, is it because that child isn't getting the proper type of attention and love and acceptance?
Yes.
And that's why they're acting out in this way, to try to, we're very adaptive creatures. Like we're trying to find the ways to try to meet our needs.
Yeah.
So anyway, I feel like I'm sort of rambling on now, but shame, I think, is a core element for people to key into, because I would wager that that's underlying the way that they're thinking and behaving. And
Yeah.
so that will allow you to target it at the root.
Yeah.
Yeah, it sounds like, I mean, because, you know, a lot of times we maybe go through things and may not think it's very significant, but it can plant a seed within us that make us respond and react.
Right.
But we may not recognize what that seed was or what caused the planting of that seed, and trying to figure it out sometimes it's difficult. So, I mean, you know, what you're talking about, yeah, I can see that could be a process, you know, because for me personally, years ago, going through a lot of stuff, I was emotional, but it was a healing process. You know, I knew I had to be around people, but I didn't want to be around people. And so I put myself around them, but I felt lonely. But, you know, but, you know, I was aware of that. I knew I had to be in that way, uncomfortable as it was. It took a few years, but then I started getting better, and where I would start socializing with people more and more and more. And so, you know, just like you're saying, you know, it's a process somebody has to go through. And so that's awesome what you're sharing there. It's really cool.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, so, it's sort of examining like what were the first messages that you received growing up, and about different topics of life, you know, around faith or around love or around money, around teamwork, because those first messages still might be playing out nowadays in your adult life when maybe it's not as helpful anymore and you want to replace it with some other type of belief. Because really all it takes is one stray intentional or unintentional comment, and that can stick with that person for a long time. Because Brene Brown talks about something called like creativity scars, where there's quite a lot of students where when they were going through school, a teacher told them like, hey, you're not good at art, or you're not good at this or that. And that student remembers that comment and stop pursuing whatever that is because of that, what that teacher said. So it's like this permanent creativity scar there. And that can happen when it comes with our parental and child relationships too. That I've heard this example before where, you know, a child brings home their report card and grades or on a test, and then the parent says, oh, you got 99%. Where's the missing 1%? Right? And then that child just then adopts that belief now that they need to be perfect. Right? If anything goes wrong or falls short of perfection, then they discount all the 99% that's actually there and feel like they need to keep pushing themselves and working hard and all that. So all it takes is one stray comment for it to be imprinted onto that child.
That is true. I remember that one because when I was like 8 years old, I had somebody say something to me, and it followed me for years, and it changed my life on what my opportunities, my decisions, my relationship. It altered everything because of one comment that they really didn't mean to be hurtful or whatever, but it came across that way. So for years I dealt with that. So thank God, I became aware of that when I got through that one. So, but it just one comment can make a difference. And so we have to remember that one comment can make a difference in a negative. So we can also choose to make that one comment that can make somebody be encouraged as well. So we can flip that choice on which way we want to do. So it can either build people up or tear them down in relationships, So that's, well, we could talk to you for all night, but we absolutely love everything you do. But we are getting ready to wrap this up. And how can people connect with you? Do you have a website, a Facebook that they can connect with you?
Yes, definitely. So I do have social media. I am on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and you can find me through my name, which is Richard Lee-Thia. I also do have a website, which is excusestoconnect.com. That's also where you can watch my TEDx talk and my podcast and check out other stuff that I'm up to. And I would definitely encourage people to reach out because this is your invitation. This is your excuse to connect, because you can say like, hey, I was listening to your show and I liked what you said about X topic and I wanted to reach out. And I'm very happy and always open to connecting with more people, because again, you never know where it can take you, and I'm open to all these possibilities in life. So yes, that's how folks can connect with me. And just to make it very clear, I'm not going to reject you. You can.
This is an easy step on the ladder, right?
Yes.
We'll be accepted. And I love that, the excuses to connect, because to me that makes it a little fun. Well, we want to we want to have that excuse. We're looking for those reasons to connect. So I love that. Excuses to connect is awesome.
Yeah.
And so we're going to wrap up, as I said. Do you have any words of wisdom or any advice for our audience today?
Yeah. There's so much.
I'm sure.
There's so much we talked about. I'm trying to think like what might be the most pertinent point. I think the biggest thing is to find the next step that works best for you. There's this term called social fitness, which I can compare to physical fitness, because there's all these different types of physical activities out there. If you like biking or swimming or rock climbing, or I know some people that even do triathlons. Right. So you find the type of physical activity that you prefer and that you like to do. Because I know for me, I don't like pushing myself that hard. I like my walks and runs. That's good for me. And so it's the same when it comes to the social realm as well, because there's really an endless array of social fitness activities. And it's finding what works for you. Because for some people, they don't want to, for example, go to the nightclub and be in this loud, crowded, sweaty place. You might prefer being part of a book club, and that's how you want to interact. Or there are sports that you want to participate in, or other activities. So recognizing that you can find the social fitness activity that fits for you, and there will be people that share those types of interests too. So that's what I would encourage folks to find, because it's important to take care of our social well-being just like our physical well-being, and you can find the activities that work for you.
Absolutely.
That sounds awesome there.
Yes.
Well, we just want to thank you again, Richard, for being on here in our show here. And excuse me, and you can share this with other people you're watching, share with others. This may resonate with those watching here, or some people click a little share down there, share them, tag them in them on the Facebook here. Yes. And share that along, so other people can be aware of what Richard's doing there and be able to help them in their lives.
Yes. That's our whole goal, is for our audience to know that we have this platform so that we can have the guests to come in, just like you, Richard, for coming in and sharing something that's very needed, but to know that we can share this with other people in our audience to view, so that we can impact others together. And so the audience, if you have anybody that and I know there's probably lots of people around that could use exactly what he's talking about, so make sure you just let them know about this, so we can all learn how to know that we're not alone, and that we can connect, and maybe on different levels at different times in our life, but you can, just like we've done. We've all had to go through a process, and life is a process. So again, we want to thank you, Richard, for being here, and we're very honored to have you here. So we want to thank our audience for watching as well. And so we will talk to you next time on the journey of life, love, and lessons.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.